Hello, my name's Michael Haidt, and welcome to my video, Creating, Running, and Monitoring an Azure Webhook Function in 10 Minutes. During this video, I'll take you from start to finish in creating a completely functional webhook built with Azure functions. We'll start from scratch and go all the way through creating the function and examining its log output in Azure storage. So let's get started. Here I've opened up my account in the Azure portal, and I don't have any function apps yet, so let's go and create one. We can do that by clicking on Create a Resource. That brings up the marketplace, and we want to search for Function App. This will search for a moment, and the first item in the result will be a Function App. So let's click on that, and in the resulting panel, press Create to get it going. That brings up a panel which we can use to create our Function App. We need to first add a name for our Function App, and this name must be unique in Azure. I'm going to name it My Func App Sample. Now we can leave the rest of the defaults as they are, but I do want to call out the hosting plan option, which defaults to consumption plan. By specifying a consumption plan, we'll only be billed for the aggregate amount of milliseconds our functions execute. Now let's click Create and get this function app up and running. This will take a few minutes, so we'll hop in the TARDIS and get back when it's done. Okay, we're back and the deployment's done, so let's go over to the Function App resource. Here we are in our Function App, and our next task is to create a function. So let's click on Functions in the tree, and then on New Function up here on top of this panel. This will take us to the Triggers panel to let us set up the trigger for our function. Now we're going to create an HTTP trigger, which is one of the most common, and hence why it's up here on the front of the list. We're going to create a C# function that is run by this trigger. So we'll click on C#, and that brings up another panel that lets us declare our function. Let's change the name of the function from the default to Say Hello function. Now this second parameter specifies the type of authorization required to call the function. This default of function specifies that a call to the function through a URL must have an Azure provided token to authorize the caller. We'll leave this as the default. So now let's click Create to create our function. This will take a few seconds, and at the end we'll be taken right to the code for the function. Okay, here's our function. Azure set us up with a default template for an HTTP trigger. We'll work with this code, so let's examine it briefly. Since we're using an HTTP trigger, this code will be run in response to a web request. So this function will be passed as its first parameter an HTTP request message object. And it will also be passed a trace writer so we can write to the log. The implementation of this function then goes and searches the query string to look for a parameter with the name of name. And if it doesn't find it there, it looks in the content of the request. And if it does find that parameter, it returns the string hello name. So this function is essentially a webhook implementing a serverless hello world function. Now this function is ready for execution, so let's go and test it inside the portal. Let's click on Test, which opens a panel which lets us execute this function. This panel sets up some defaults for the HTTP request and also gives us a sample request body. And in this case, it's going to pass in Azure as the name. So let's just click Run and it'll go and execute the function. And it's already done, and it's popped up the Logs panel, and the log shows that this function was actually run. Let's scroll over to the right on this log panel, because this last entry is interesting, because it tells us that this execution took 103 milliseconds. So Azure is timing our function execution, and this is how much we'll get billed for. Now let's run the function again, but let's change the name to Mike, and press Run. And we have a few more log entries, so let's go see how long this took to run this time. Wow, this only took 0 milliseconds to execute. Now obviously this took some time to run, but it's too short a time to register in this log entry. Now a webhook wouldn't be all that valuable if we could only run it from the portal. So to run it outside this portal, we can use this get function URL link to get the address of our function. So let's go click on that and get the URL. And there's the URL to run this function. Note that it starts with the name of our function app, followed by azurewebsites.net, and then /API /our function name. And also included is an authorization code since we're using the function level authorization. Azure generated this code for us and put it in the URL. So let's copy this URL to the clipboard, and we're going to go hop over to Postman and make a request to this URL. I've opened Postman, and we're going to make a GET request. So let's paste the URL in the address box and then press send. And off goes the request. And here we got our response, which tells us we need to add a name parameter. So let's go append that to the URL. So ampersand name equals Michael and press send. And there we go. We've got our response message. So let's hop back to the portal and see that this was actually logged. We do have an extra log entry in here, but it's not very obvious to us. So let's modify the function to log the data that's been passed in. So let's add some code. If name is not equal to null, let's go and use our trace writer. So log.info saying hi to name. And also let's change the response message to actually say hi and follow it up with a nice exclamation point. Now let's save this function by pressing save. And this actually causes Azure to recompile our function, and we can see that it was compiled successfully. So let's hop back over to Postman and give this a test. Let's change the name from Michael to Marcia and press send. And look, we've already got our response. And just like that, we've got a new version of our function running. So let's go back to the portal and actually check that our log entries also exist. And there we go. We have saying hi to Marcia in our log. Now this log output isn't just console output that's being lost. It's being streamed into the storage account that we created when we set up our app. And we can go check that information in this monitor panel. This monitor dashboard shows us how many times our function has successfully been run, how many times it's failed with an exception, and it shows us the invocation log, which lets us know which functions run, which verb was used, how long it took to run, and how long ago it was executed. And by clicking on any of these, we can see the invocation details, as well as all the log entries that were written during its execution. We can also access this information from outside Azure using the storage account. So I'm going to start up Azure Storage Explorer, and we can use that to drill into the information in our storage account. Okay, so we're in Azure Storage Explorer. Let's go into the subscription I put my function app in. And we can see the storage account that was created when we set up the app. So let's drill into that account and bring up the tables. And we want to go and look at the Azure Web Jobs host logs for the current day, so 2018-02. And this will take a second to load, but there it is, it's all loaded up. The rows with I represent an invocation of a function. And scrolling over a little bit, we can see we have the start time and end time of the invocation. And then we have a JSON representation of the arguments passed into the function. And scrolling over a little further, we can see which function was executed, and we can also see the log output from that execution. And since this is all stored in a storage account, you can go and use your favorite tools on it, like Splunk or Datadog, and get all kinds of wonderful operational insights into your functions. So we're at the end of this video. I know we went through this pretty quick, but I hope I gave you a feel for just how easy to use Azure functions are. There's a ton of information we didn't cover in this video, and I hope to see you again in further videos to go deeper into those topics. And thanks for checking out this video, and I hope to see you in the future.